All right, so you can start to see how there's like when I make a change here, it looks like lots of little fireflies, and then it kind of slowly comes into resolution. There's still quite a bit of these, what I will call like little fireflies. That has to do with the number of samples, right, of the light bounces and calculation. So that I'd want to increase the samples. Increase the number of samples, and that's going to help my Arnold to kind of calculate out some of those fireflies. I can do it through let me see if it's, I can increase these samples through the light itself, or it can kind of ham-fist the samples through the render settings, which I'll come back to in a minute. Yeah, I don't think that's going to do it here. And I could maybe bring this up even higher. Yeah, so I'll show you in my render settings. In Arnold Render. So this is going to be kind of an indirect. So this is indirect lights that are causing this. So that these fireflies are caused by not the direct light from the spotlight, but from lights hitting this like shape and bouncing back here, right? Like it looks brighter on this corner and darker over here, even though this corner is kind of technically closer to the light. That's because the light is bouncing off of the other cube and then bouncing back here. So that's an indirect sample. So I'd want to increase my indirect and then increase my diffuse. And if that doesn't take care of it, let's see, that looks a lot better. But it's there is still some, you can still see it. I want to increase even more. And I don't know if you can tell, but it's taking longer. Down here you can see it's still going. Okay, it just finished. So it takes longer, but it's starting to smooth that out. So that relationship between all of these sample rates and the kind of quality of the render, that's that dynamic. And again, for a single render, like you might want to just like, scoot those all the way up. So the camera, this double A, I'm going to bring these back down to like 2. I think it was 2. That camera double A, that's going to be like the most ham-fisted way to increase all of these sample rates. It's actually like a multiplier. So it takes all of these sample rates and then it kind of multiplies it by the camera. So it's a really easy way, if you have time for the render, to just like keep bouncing that back up. And it's going to multiply the diffuse, the specular, which is the shiny, the transmission, which is glass. So the transmission is like when you're going through clear objects, the amount of samples and calculations you need to go through like a glass. And then the subsurface scattering is like things like marble and skin, where the light is actually kind of entering into the material just a little bit and kind of bouncing around inside of the material. So you can see here, these settings are back down to 2, but when I increase the camera, it looks even a little bit better than it did, right, when it was set even to like 4. But that takes a lot longer. So this took 14 seconds versus, let me take this back down and increase it like 5, and then 7. This took, that needs to be, oh, we need this. We need it to multiply times something. Yeah. So that took 3 seconds, and I'd probably want this to go up to 7. Still going. 5 seconds. So it looks a little bit better at like 5 seconds with the diffuse and the indirect. So the indirects are the bounces off the other objects. It looks a little bit better at 5 seconds with those 2 dialed in than it did with the kind of multiply the camera at 7, which took 13 seconds because it was calculating out at all of these types of light bounces. So if that's too much, you don't necessarily need to know that for right now, but if you're getting these really fuzzy and kind of pixelated lights in your scene, you'd want to go into your render settings, and then while you're still learning what the materials are, as long as you just have the default materials, it's going to be these indirect and diffuse samples that you'd want to increase. Once we start adding like shiny objects or glass or marbles, then you'd want to go in and get a little bit more dialed in. All right, so I'm going to close that. I like those settings. That looks good. So that's a combination here of these volume samples within the light itself, and then the kind of master render samples as well. All right, so that's Spotlight. And what else did I want to talk about? All right, so with the Spotlight selected, I can go up into my Modify tab, and then under my Transform tools, and then I want to show Manipulator Tool. So this little guy is actually it's invisible until you tell it to show the manipulator tool, but it is actually what the light is pointing at. So you could, let's say you wanted to track a character as they walked across the stage, you could keep the light in the same place, and then you would add a constraint onto your character, and you would track this little guy would follow your character and kind of move across the stage with them. So that's a great way to kind of control, a realistic kind of spotlight. And you can still move. You can still move the light itself, but it will always point at that at the transformation, the manipulator axis. Okay. Now I keep moving through. Okay, so that is the spotlight. So I'm going to add a directional light so you can kind of see what the difference is there. So this is the directional light, and so you can see even in the render preview, it's kind of making a more consistent wash over the scene. There's still a direction, but it's kind of shining almost like from all areas around in the scene. So it kind of mimics sunlight in that way. So again, you'd want to, let's go into my IPR. Yeah, too much. So because this light is kind of coming in from all raking angles and it's bigger, we don't need as much of that intensity here. So let's see here, 5, there we go. But you can go back into your Arnold tab down here and play with exposure if you wanted it to be brighter without that kind of like overwash of an intensity. And then you can go in and increase, ooh, it's too bright, and then increase the number of samples. The directional light tends not to have, except for kind of around shadows, as many of those little fireflies, but you would still want to probably increase it from its default. It's probably just because I'm zoomed in too far. That looks pretty good. Yeah. Okay. So I think that was there another? Oh, area light. So I'm going to delete this directional light and I'm going to show you area light now. The area light is this rectangular looking icon. So this you can see that it also has a direction that it's facing, and it's giving you just kind of like a soft glow. Now the area light is one of those lights that has a scale feature, so the bigger the light, the brighter it's going to be in your scene. And so if you're trying to create something like studio lighting, that's probably let's put that quadratic back on and bring the intensity up to 1000. And bring my outliner up. And I'm going to duplicate this light. So you can do that a couple of ways. I'm going to go into edit, and then I'm going to say duplicate. And then I can grab that light and change the rotation. So this is how you get kind of accurate studio lighting, right? So they have these area lights, usually from 3 or more sides. And I'm going to now use Command D to duplicate. And so you saw it just got brighter. It's because I just hit Command D and I duplicated that object. And I'm going to bring it over here and then rotate it so that it's facing my objects. And it is far too bright, so I'm going to bring down this to like 400 and maybe 400 and 400. Alright, so now I'm starting to get a little bit more dynamic shadows. It's still pretty hot, I can tell, on the top of this cylinder, so I might want to move it back. And it's still pretty hot right here, so I might want to move it just kind of off and maybe rotate it. Alright, let's open up the render preview and see how that goes. Maybe I was too conservative. That looks a little dark to me, so I'm going to bring back the intensity to maybe 700, 800, maybe 1,000 isn't too bad. It was just looking super, super bright in my preview window. Shut it down. And let's see. Let's say 7. The other thing too is if you're trying to get really realistic lighting, these lights come in at like a color, I think, of the a color that is no. How about no? Okay. There we go. A bright white, so you can see the hue saturation value is set to 100% white. No lights in the world are that kind of perfect white. So if you're trying to get more realistic lighting, giving it like a soft gray, or even kind of finding a color like a soft color or a mixed color, is going to give you much more realistic lighting. You're almost trying to make the lighting look bad to make it look realistic. So just kind of like slightly like warm, slightly cool. I can see that there's this massive hot spot. If I was working on this for, I'd want to make sure that I don't see these kind of massive hot spots. But that's more true for the final render than in the render preview. So I'm going to give it like a gray and then kind of bring in some color here. Okay, so you can even start to see like a little bit of that kind of mixture of like the blue and the kind of warm. So that's going to give you, I probably over exaggerated here, but let's bring up the render preview. It's still a little bit dark, but like if you're going for a moody scene, that could be fine. But see how here we've got those kind of like icky spots, like those little spotlights. It's still rendering. Let's see, we've got 40%, 45%. I don't think it's gonna, maybe it'll kind of knock those out, but I think I'd need to, increase my render settings again. So I'm gonna go in and let's bring that all the way up, and then maybe bring total render settings up to 4. Let's see what happens. It'll be pretty slow. Okay, so that took 2 minutes and 41 seconds, but look at how gorgeous that is. So I can still see a tiniest little bit, but I think that has more to do with like we're looking at kind of the pixel differentiation at that scale. So I think it looks pretty good. Really beautiful, complex shadows. Nice. If the image was bigger, we'd get some nice crisp, I think, like color banding. That could be. I'd say okay. If I was doing this for a client or something, my beautiful squares for a client, I would actually probably want to increase some of this. I think that you can see these kind of color bandings, and that would be an artifact. I might bring these indirects down and just bring all of the samples kind of ham-fisted up. But that looks really good for our purposes today. So let's say I was happy with this and I wanted to save this image out.